First-degree murder is usually the principal reason for receiving a death sentence. Whether personal conviction pits a conscience on the side of the accused or the accuser, death sentences have always been a staple of the criminal justice system. Throughout the years, the method of demise in most countries has taken steps to err on the side of humanity and precision. For example, hanging was once a preferred method of execution in the United States. It was far less messy than the guillotine, and stoning was a bit archaic, even for the earliest Americans. However, when electricity started to illuminate the nation, it wasn't long before it started to charge the execution chambers of prisons, not only through the U.S., but across the globe. It wasn't long, however, before medical advancements gave rise to lethal injection, which proved to be, in theory, a more compassionate and accurate manner of death. Yet, even with the different, supposedly more reliable forms of execution, there are those that slip through the cracks, those that beat unbelievable odds and cheat death. Number 1. Anne Green. Anne Green was a woman who simply refused to die. In early spring of 1650, Green was working as a servant to Sir Thomas Reed. During that time, she became pregnant after relations with Reed's grandson, though Green fiercely denied she was with child. However, 6 months into her pregnancy, she was churning malt when she fell ill and miscarried the child. Horrified by what happened, Green allegedly tried to dispose of the tiny body in a cesspit, although the corpse was discovered, and Green was accused of infanticide. The Oxford trial apparently lacked sufficient evidence, though the jury still found her guilty and she was sentenced to death. On December 14, 1650, Anne Green was hanged. Eventually, the sheriff decided she must be dead, and her body was released to William Petty, an Oxford surgeon and anatomical researcher. Before the doctor arrived, Green awoke, and an unnamed man who saw her body's signs of life decided to try to finish her off. The man stomped on her head and chest until Dr. Petty arrived and was able to revive her. Once revived, Dr. Petty and others at Oxford petitioned for her pardon, which was granted. Anne Green eventually married and bore 3 children, before succumbing to death during childbirth in 1665. Number 2. Winslow Miguel. While fighting in the Mexican Revolution in 1915, Winslow Miguel was captured and without any trial at all was sentenced to die via firing squad for the crime of being a traitor. However, on March 18, 1915, the Federales shot 10 rounds at Miguel, with 9 of them hitting their mark. The last bullet was even shot at close range through the side of Miguel's face to ensure the sentence was carried out. Miraculously, a now horribly disfigured Miguel survived and was able to escape the scene of his would-be murder after his executioners had left. Miguel's brazen luck and unbelievable story of escape eventually caught the attention of Robert Ripley, and he became a favorite of the Ripley's Believe It or Not exhibit. Winslow Miguel lived to be 85, leading a full life after surviving his death sentence. Number 3. Willie Francis. I'm not dying, the 16-year-old screamed as he thrashed in the electric chair moments before it was turned off, only to relive the same fate a year later, to ultimately end his life. Of all the people on this list, the case of Willie Francis is probably the most disturbing. This is not only because of the horror a 16-year-old boy had to endure when 2 drunk guards failed to properly set the electric chair gruesome Gertie, which caused it to malfunction. It isn't because, as a result of their negligence, the boy was tortured instead of killed. The worst part isn't even because the boy was killed only a year later, when the stay of execution was lifted. What makes this case so disturbing was that the evidence shows that Willie Francis was likely an innocent victim himself. If the Louisiana courts had done their due diligence, instead of giving the African-American boy a sham of a trial, sentencing him to death for the murder of a white man, the boy would have likely been acquitted. In fact, according to the evidence, he may not have even been brought to trial to begin with. Number 4. Alva Campbell. In 1998, Alva Campbell was sentenced to death after being found guilty of a 1997 carjacking, during which Campbell murdered 18-year-old Charles Stiles. Campbell's life was supposed to end, according to the United States justice system, on November of 2017, when he was due to be executed via lethal injection. Ironically, he survived his sentence due to the 69-year-old's poor health. Since his veins were small, the executioners were unable to find a vein which would be suitable to administer the lethal drugs. After trying to find a vein for 25 to 30 minutes, the execution was halted, and Campbell was returned to his cell. Once the execution failed, Campbell brought his case to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit Court, ultimately hoping for his sentence to be commuted. Nevertheless, Campbell's next execution date was set for June 6, 2019. Although, on March 3, 2018, Campbell was found unresponsive in his cell and subsequently died without ever answering for his crime. Number 5. Zolika Kadkoa. In 1997, Zolika Kadkoa was a 20-year-old Iranian girl who was convicted of adultery. The punishment throughout the Middle East for such a crime is capital punishment, and in this case, Kadkoa was sentenced to be stoned to death. As a result, on August 11th, 1997, Kadkoa was buried up to her chest to keep her from escaping, and then the stoning started. Allegedly, the villagers were against the stoning, though, because they were apparently outraged and tried to stop the execution. Yet, the stoning only stopped when her executioners thought that Kadkoa was dead. The woman was then brought to the morgue, where miraculously, she started breathing and eventually made a full recovery. Once revived, Kadkoa's story made international headlines, and because of the pressure and attention those headlines attracted, she was ultimately pardoned and released later that year. Hanging, stoning, electric chair, firing squad, lethal injection. The progression of the death penalty still has lifespans to go before reaching perfection. However, due to the vastness of the methods used by executioners, the question remains, is there a truly perfect method that can be constitutionally sanctioned to complete such a supposedly final sentence? While that question cannot be answered here, the conclusion that can be drawn from these cases is that if it's not your time, there's always the possibility of life after a death sentence.